The challenge of economic development has rested in the hearts and minds of the people of Chautauqua County since the very origin of Europeans coming to the county. And of course, the first economic development activity that took place in the county was the harvesting of the lumber and forestry products of the county and the shipping of them downstream to Pittsburgh and points beyond. We look into the history of the town of Ellicott and we read Hazeltine, and we find that James Pendergast, in his purchase of properties, also offered properties to people with various skills to attract them to come and settle in the vicinity of the rapids. We find the first government activity in the area guaranteeing a woolen mill a certain sum of money if certain number of mill pieces were put into place. So economic development is not something that is new to Chautauqua County. It's woven in the history of Chautauqua County. We find, however, the most aggressive economic development taking place at a county level starting in the mid-1960s with the authorization by the state of New York that county government could be involved in economic development. Before that, economic development was basically the roles of the local chambers of commerce or development groups that were in the north and the south part of the county. When we look at economic development, we have to look at what we're talking about in its very basic forms. And if we're talking about economic development, we can talk about it at two planes. We can talk about it as industrial development, and then we can talk about it as economic development, and then we can also look at it as just the creation of new jobs, not necessarily in any specific economic sector of the county. For years and years throughout the nation's history, we've looked at manufacturing as the place that great jobs were created. Maybe I've used the wrong term great, but in the manufacturing process, in the history of manufacturing, depending upon what segment of it you were talking about, industry was able to create a basic job, and if it was a vibrant job, it possibly would swing off and create a secondary or a half of a tertiary job, so that to create one manufacturing job in the final analysis might mean as many as 3 jobs within the economic influence of that one manufacturing job. Manufacturing jobs in many instances historically in Chautauqua County were of adequate vitality that each of the jobs could almost or did support a family. Things have changed. Manufacturing has changed. In 1952, which was the furthest back I could acquire economic development information that I could then compare forward to the present, we had about 52,000 people employed in Chautauqua County. Almost 26,000 of them were employed in manufacturing opportunities. However, they had a broad range of experience and income, and some jobs paid more than others. I can remember Jess Presence early in his political career going to a fair sponsored by one of our county manufacturing organizations at Midway Point, and he said, "John," he said, "I drove into the parking lot and there wasn't a new car, a relatively new car in the parking lot. And the kids were riding on the rides at Midway because they were free. Whether or not it made them sick or not was immaterial. It was free." He said it was an experience to realize that this industry, which will remain unidentified, had that level of employment and was returning to the people working in the industry an income that was very, he came away from the gathering feeling very upset at what he had seen in that we were talking about jobs and job manufacturing, and here was a segment of our manufacturing sector that really was providing as minimal a wage as they possibly could to survive. And at that time, that particular industry was in great national competition. One of the things that has happened, being the planning director of Chautauqua County from 1960 back to 1990, is to see a change, several changes taking place. When I came here, most of the manufacturing was, quote, locally owned, probably within the state or an adjacent state. Today, if we are interested in talking to the headquarters office of some of our manufacturers, we can go to Spain, we can go to Sweden, we can go to England, we can go to Korea or to Hong Kong to talk to the decision makers about a particular industrial activity. Whereas in 1960, we had this local ownership pattern. In 1960, basically manufacturing, except for those that were involved in doing defense manufacturing, supplied a product and they only competed with people west of the Mississippi. I'm sorry, east of the Mississippi. And that was the world that they competed in. Today, almost anything that is manufactured in Chautauqua County, with the exception of some furniture, has an international competitor. And by international, I mean Korea. I mean France, Italy, Swerolinka? No, that's not right. I got that one scrambled. Anyway, the Asian Pacific is a great competitor. We used to have clothes manufactured in Chautauqua County. We had a woolen mill. We had a great wooden furniture industry. We still have some segments of a great wooden furniture industry. We used to have great metal workers in Chautauqua County. We still have great metal workers in Chautauqua County, but the number are fewer. We are now looking at an employment profile in Chautauqua County of some 63,000 people. Some 13 or 14,000 of our are now employed in manufacturing. And somebody can say, hey, look at all the other growth that took place. Well, let me give you an identification of growth that I know something about. From 1970 to 1980, we had about 4,800 new jobs added in Chautauqua County. And when you got down and looked in the census numbers as to the number of men and women that were new jobs were created for, there were about 385 jobs more for men, and all of the rest were for women. And most of those were in the healthcare and the service industries. Realize that two of our largest employers, the Resource Center and WCA Hospital, are dynamically tied to federal state programs. And while they do important things within our economy, the Resource Center does some defense contracting, but that's only under rigid regulation that forces them, the defense industries, to come to the Resource Center. So we can look at the Resource Center as an employer. We can look at WCA as an employer, a very sophisticated employer. But when we're talking about general economic development, I would again take you back to 1960 as I arrived and started working with the Chautauqua County Planning Board. And in 1962, we had published a document entitled A Dialogue Plan. In that dialogue plan, we attempted to identify those areas in the county that were attractive for industrial or other types of economic development. Based on the guidance from the Planning Board, we wrote a section on recreational development. And we noted that there were 2 places in Chautauqua County where the topography was such that probably a good ski slope could be developed. And along with that ski slope could come a summer activity with a golf course and a resort facility. However, these were very specific areas, and it was the decision of the planning board that we should not specifically state where those locations were, because if we did, we would change the economic opportunity in the particular sites. Well, by the time we get to the end of 1980, we have a Peak and Peak and a Cockaigne. Peak and Peak is on one of those sites. Cockaigne is 1 valley away from probably the best and most exciting ski slope in Chautauqua County. It's up in Farrington Hollow. It can never be developed now. Under the regulations that we have now dealing with the environment, it would be impossible to develop the Farrington Hollow ski slope. It's on the eastern end, or the eastern side of Botwell Hill. But we could never do it today. We could have done it in the 60s with the regulations that were in place at that time. Economic development demands a number of things. If you are interested in economic development in Chautauqua County, you've got to look at what industry or commerce is looking for in terms of a site. If we're talking about commercial development or office development or manufacturing development, we're talking about property that should have less than an 8% slope. It should be well-drained soils. It should be associated with transportation facilities, good highway access, good access to the interstate system or other superhighways, good access to rail. We used to have rail up at a very high priority level of economic development need, and we've seen a change in what the rails are carrying. We've seen a change in the regulations that deal with rail transportation. And while rail transportation still plays an important role in some of our industrial manufacturing segments, it doesn't play as high a level as they did historically. But if we want to create something that would be attractive for industrial development, let's just talk about industrial development or manufacturing development for a moment, because there are still some tremendously high salaried opportunities within that field, or contract opportunities. And let's not talk about state regulation or federal regulation, but they do play a role in what happens. The workmen's compensation regulations, as an example, in the state of New York. The way the state of New York feels toward unions, these play subtle roles in economic development. But I want to get away from that material at this point, or those concepts, and talk about just a site, a place where we want to locate a manufacturing facility. We want good access to the interstate. We want rail transportation. We want possibly water. Realize that when you create, as an example, if you're going to create a school, a new school site, wherever you're going to place that new school, they need at least 15 gallons a day per the enrollment within the school. So when you're talking about manufacturing, let's talk about a manufacturing facility that needs no water except for its domestic needs. We're talking about needing 15 to 25 gallons a day for each of the employees that's going to be employed in that particular manufacturing activity. Now, they've used 15 or 25 gallons a day. Now we have sewage that has to be treated. So we need access to a water facility. We need access to a sewage facility. Or can the water and sewer facility be economically developed on the site where you have the best railroad and the best highway access? There's a fifth thing that comes up: electricity or power. It may be gas that they need, it may be electricity. Where in Chautauqua County do we have the best opportunities to provide electrical service and gas service? And lastly, while we've said the site has to be well drained, we must make sure that downstream of whatever we're going to construct, we construct our facility in such a manner that we don't create a flooding problem for those areas that we've made impervious. A good example of paying attention in that type of stewardship was led by Fran Morgan in the development of the Wegman and the Kmart facility. If you visit that facility, you'll see a drainage sump that drains the whole parking lot. And that drainage sump plays two roles. It prevents flooding downstream, and as I understand its design, it also is capable of picking up sedimentation off of the parking lot, and those materials have to be taken out of the facility every once in a while. But that's the type of thing that you've got to talk about if you're talking about industrial development. Now, one of the things that we probably can't support in Chautauqua County without a tremendous investment is segments of the paper industry. They demand large quantities of water. If we go around and look at all of our water facilities in Chautauqua County that are publicly owned, we find that there are none of them that, if I were to call up and say, tomorrow I'd like 1 million gallons of water, that they would freely say, oh, hey, come on, we've got it. We don't have to make any investment or anything. It's, all we have to do is hook you up. Then let's look at how many places might have 500,000 gallons of water that would be available immediately at no capital cost. They're far and few between. Let's now look at the facilities that have, if they have the water capacity, do they have the sewage treatment capacity? How many facilities in Chautauqua County could take another 1 million gallons of sewage without having to make an additional capital expenditure? These are the challenges that we have when we're dealing with economic development for Chautauqua County. We have access to the interstate. We have the railroads. However, the railroads in the southern part of the county have a cloud over them, and I don't know exactly how to identify the type of cloud that it is. But they do have a cloud over them in terms of their stability. The North Chautauqua County area has very fine opportunity to have their rail service continued. But this is not the case in the South County. We hope within the decade to see the Southern Tier Expressway completed not only through the rest of Chautauqua County, but through the state of Pennsylvania. We'll know the governor, of course, comes from Erie, and he says, at our last dedication of the last piece to be built in Chautauqua County, you know I'm from this area and I'm interested in the completion of this road. It's important, it's dynamically important to the Southern Tier that the Southern Tier Expressway be completed, because it looks like parts of our rail system are going to even further disappear. Realize that when I came to Chautauqua County in 1950, we had a railroad that ran from Brockton down through Clymer, that we had a railroad that had just been closed down up the east side of the lake. I shouldn't say when I came here, it was when I was courting my wife in the 50s. We had a railroad that used to run from Fredonia to Warren. These are all rights-of-way now, and many of the rights-of-way have disappeared into a multiplicity of ownership. So when we're talking about manufacturing needs, we've got to look at that type of thing. Are we willing to put together a spec capacity system of water and sewage someplace in the county so that we are competitively attractive. I have not talked anything about the economic development activity or the Chautauqua County Economic Development Agency or the Dunkirk Development Agency, but we have a number of organizations that are available and that have funding access to make loans, in some instances grants, but those are not the things that we need to have in hand at this moment. If we want to create a business plaza, I can remember working for Libertyville, Illinois back in the mid-50s, and we put an area on their planning map that said scientific industrial park that only had research facilities in it, nice, clean, tidy, high-paying jobs. Well, I went back there last year and it's all filled up, but realized that was from 1954 to 1995 that it took to fill those up. It doesn't happen overnight. What are we prepared to do to compete? Everybody is involved in putting together spec capacity, spec buildings. We have at least 2 incubator systems going in Chautauqua County. We have manpower training going on or capably of being recruited to deliver. One of our industries several years ago had a employment drive because they were going to add X number of hundreds of additional jobs. And a surprisingly number of people that were involved in taking the exam to compete for those jobs could not handle 7th grade mathematics and 7th grade English. And if these people are going to be reading blueprints or involved with our new scientific automated industry, they're going to have a better education than that. We have, with several organizations in the county, the opportunity to train these people. But do we have the site and do we have the facility for either a business complex or an industrial complex that needs a significant amount of utility service? And if the answer is no, we don't, then if we want to stay competitive and we want to continue to compete for manufacturing jobs generally in the world, not in the northeastern United States anymore, but in the world, then we're going to have to make a substantial investment in, I think, particularly water, sewer, and electrical distribution opportunity. We have the highway infrastructure. However, I would say, having been part of the creation of the North Chautauqua County Industrial Park, when we sited that park, we felt that most of the people we were going to be dealing with were going to be railroad oriented for their product moving in and out of the plant. They are now looking at trying to get some type of reasonable road access to that facility. We did not site that facility on the basis of ease of access to the interstate system. We built it because the city of Dunkirk could provide water and it could provide sewer service. Niagara Mohawk could provide electrical service very easily there, and we had railroad service. So we missed out on one of the elements that I've spoken to you about today. How much are we willing to speculate? Many places in the United States are speculating, and that's what it will be, a speculation. And it could be that the park will sit empty for an extended period of time. And this is what we saw happen in the North Chautauqua County Industrial Park and in the original South Chautauqua County Industrial Park. There are a couple of years there where the land sat fallow. But go down to the South Industrial Park today and look at Bush Industries and realize that the Industrial Development Agency has acquired additional land. But again, we have the question of, do we have excess water supply capacity within the Jamestown community, excess sewage capacity within the Jamestown community? Do we make an investment in changing those excess capacities? Does the well field of the city of Jamestown, what is the maximum yield that we can get out of it without stressing it and changing the chemical characteristics of the water? I've seen some literature that suggests that in places that have used groundwater for groundwater, is their source of water, that as the demand has gone higher and higher and higher, the water is moving through the aquifer faster and faster and faster, that we've actually changed the chemical composition, downgraded the quality of the water in those particular areas. Those are things that we have to look at as we deal with the question of economic development. I do not turn my face away from the tourism industry or the recreational industry, but we must realize that it is highly seasonal, and in most instances it creates jobs. The majority of the jobs that are created in that particular area are at the lowest end of the income scale. And in fact, if we lose one manufacturing job in Chautauqua County today, it would take 3 jobs in the recreational tourism field to make up for the economic impact of the loss of that one manufacturing job. So it's a very difficult thing to look at and realize where you're going to allocate your resources. There is a whole history of economic development in the county, and a later segment I hope to be able to take you from through what I call the exciting years, the years of David Dawson and several other people, Robert Altweiss, and the industrial development agencies of Dunkirk and for the county, and the other things that have sprung up, the effort of COI, the effort of several other organizations in Jamestown that deal with education for the people, how JCC has tuned into this opportunity. There's a whole webbing of things that have got to come together. And if we are interested in seeing Chautauqua County hold its population, we are going to have to do something about economic development. If we are going to hold the year-round population, realize that from the close of World War II to today, the growth in Chautauqua County has been insignificant. The fact of the matter is that we export our greatest product, our young people. We are exporting between 9,000 and 10,000 people a year into the rest of the world after we have educated them. And that's one of the challenges that we must look at. People say, but oh, look at the beautiful growth around the shores of Chautauqua Lake. It's an entirely different economic activity. It has nothing to do with the economy of Chautauqua County. It has to do with a region which is much bigger than the county, a region that reaches to New York City, that reaches to St. Louis, that reaches to Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And that's where those people are coming from. But when you go out and look at a house or an activity that is tied to the local economy in terms of jobs and residency, we have a real difficult challenge ahead of us here in Chautauqua County. When I came here, we competed in the northeastern segment of the United States. We watched several plants that we competed for go into the Carolinas and Tennessee. We now are looking at one of our major employers that is controlled out of an operation in Ohio. It's a challenge for us, and we've got to come together in a concise mode to stop the out-migration of our young people and give them an opportunity to remain as residents of Chautauqua County.